computerized bugs were installed in the homes of leading mobsters around the country, including Lansky's new ranch house near Miami. One night, the agents overheard Lansky remark to his wife that organized crime was, quote, bigger than U.S. Steel. That was precisely what the feds suspected. They saw Lansky as the chief financial officer of a vast, secret mob corporation. Other wiretaps seemed to support that impression, especially the surveillance of a New Jersey mobster named Anthony Gyp DiCarlo. On tape, DiCarlo boasted that Lansky had reopened his connections to Nevada gambling, was heavily involved in skimming profits from Las Vegas casinos, and was once again making millions. But Meyer was still safe from arrest. Since the bugs were unauthorized, the feds couldn't use the evidence against the mob tycoon. The FBI had to watch as Lansky went about his daily life, strolling through Miami Beach, having coffee in the afternoon, and going to clubs at night. One act he saw over and over was Jewish comedian Jackie Mason, who came frequently to Miami to perform.
I couldn't get over it that this top man from the whole mafia is following me around. I knew he wasn't trying to kill me, so I figured he must be enjoying my act.
After shows, Mason would join Lansky and his friends at their table.
He loved the power. I could see he loved the power, because when people sat around him with that worshipful look on their faces, you could tell that he knew he was the boss, and he acted it. I used to say to him, how much money do you really have? I swear to you by my life, I'll keep my mouth shut. And he would laugh and change the subject, or give me a hug, or give me a kibitz, and I could never find out anything.
The FBI was having the same problem. Lansky was proving to be an elusive target. So the FBI put together a team of agents called a strike force dedicated solely to nailing Lansky. At the helm was a young prosecutor named R.J. Campbell.
One of the problems we had in dealing with Lansky was he was pretty much already retired, with maybe a quotation marks around the word retired. But he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't out committing anything which was even close to a crime, say.
That didn't stop him from being one of the most famous underworld figures in America. His daily walks with his dog Bruiser made him easy prey for any photographer. Then, in March 1970, as Lansky returned from a vacation in Mexico, customs agents found in his luggage a bottle of ulcer medicine for which he had no prescription. He was arrested for possession of illegal drugs. A judge threw out the charge, but Lansky had had enough.
He decided the best thing was just to get out and to take asylum where every Jew can take asylum, in Israel.
Lansky had always admired Israel. When the Jewish state had been fighting for independence in 1948, Lansky held a fundraiser. He also claimed to have used his New York dock connections to stop arms shipments to the Arabs and reroute the weapons to Israel. Now he believed his loyalty would be rewarded. In June 1970, Lansky and his wife Teddy flew to Tel Aviv. In 1971, the Justice Department summoned him back. After 10 years of investigations, the feds had finally indicted Lansky for the skimming of Las Vegas casinos. In Tel Aviv, Lansky was unconcerned. As he had planned all along, he applied for Israeli citizenship. But at the worst possible moment, Lansky's gangster reputation caught up with him. The Israeli press began to take an interest in this Jewish relic of the mafia world. To escape the press coverage, Lansky moved out of Tel Aviv to a resort hotel on the Mediterranean beach. But the cameras found him there too, just as they had in Miami, out walking his dog. So Lansky granted interviews to reporters in which he claimed he was a victim of media hype.
A newspaper man started a campaign against me, and it snowballed to such an extent that I guess it can't be stopped anymore. I was singled out for some reason. They needed an image. Some newspaper man wrote an article that I have $300 million. Well, I wish I had $1 million.
The controversy meant that Lansky's application for citizenship had to be reviewed by Israel's Interior Minister, Joseph Borg. Borg raised the touchy topic of Lansky one afternoon with his boss, Prime Minister Golda Meir.
Golda Meir apparently had never heard of Meyer Lansky. As he started to explain who Lansky was or was thought to be, he said the word mafia, at which Golda Meir stopped him and said, "Mafia? Mafia? No mafia in Israel."
Israel turned down Lansky's application for citizenship, declaring him a threat to the state. Lansky immediately appealed to the Israeli Supreme Court. Israel needed evidence that Lansky was a threat, and the U.S., which now wanted Lansky back, was happy to help. The Justice Department gave Israel the complete Lansky files.
They had first-hand testimony from witnesses who had seen Lansky beat up somebody or participate in beating up people. So they had a lot of stuff from the 20s and 30s which had Lansky actually doing a bunch of things as opposed to just kind of walking his dog, which is what he was doing in the 1970s.
In September 1972, Israel's Supreme Court ruled against Lansky.
Well, so long.
He was ordered to leave the country. Not giving in, Lansky arranged to flee Israel in secret and to bribe officials to smuggle him into hiding in Paraguay. In November '72, Lansky quietly boarded a night flight that would take him to South America. As his jet crossed the Atlantic, the FBI tracked him down. When he arrived in Paraguay, he wasn't allowed to get off the plane.
Every stop that the plane came down to, there was the FBI man standing on the tarmac with the local police chief, making sure that Lansky didn't get off, stayed on the plane, and was on his way back to, inevitably therefore, to Miami and arrest, where the FBI would let him off the plane and would surely lock him up.
And finally, he shows up in Miami, and of course there's a big arrest, and they can lead him away in handcuffs, and that's the kind of thing the FBI loves.
The government finally had a case against Meyer Lansky, and now it had Lansky himself. The aging mob tycoon would be forced to do battle with his own country in the courtroom. Meyer Lansky's attempted escape to Israel had been thwarted. On November 7, 1972, he was returned to Miami, arrested after landing, and charged with contempt of court and income tax evasion. Lansky's wife, Teddy, arrived in Miami from Tel Aviv 3 days later. Unlike her stoic husband, Teddy Lansky had never gotten used to reporters.
Now look, go away from me, I'll kill you. I just won't know.
When the reporters wouldn't leave her alone, Teddy used a tactic her husband had never tried. She spat on them. The Justice Department was thrilled to have Lansky back in the U.S. For years, he had been a top FBI target, but Lansky had never been convicted of anything more serious than illegal gambling. Now the feds hoped they could put him behind bars for good. Lansky's first trial was for contempt of court. While in Israel, he had failed to show up when summoned to a Miami grand jury. Lansky claimed that his doctor in Israel had forbidden the trip home to testify, but the jury didn't buy it. Lansky was convicted and sentenced to a year in prison, but he remained free on appeal. He still had to stand trial for tax evasion. This case hinged on an unreliable informer, a Boston mobster named Vincent Fat Vinny Teresa. Teresa told the feds that he had brought illegally skimmed profits from London casinos to mob investors in the States, and he assured his interrogators that on 2 occasions he had personally given thousands of dollars to Meyer Lansky.
Well, this is the first guy anybody ever testified to putting big amounts of money in Lansky's hands, literally in his hands. And so we were kind of excited about it and started to develop a case.
Mafia turncoats always make tricky witnesses, but Fat Vinny was the government's best shot at nailing Lansky. The trial began in July 1973. Teresa told the jury that he gave Lansky the mob money on 2 occasions, both in Miami. But Lansky's lawyer, David Rosen, was able to show that on one of those occasions, Lansky was in Boston. The little man himself, whose increasing frailty kept the trial sessions to a few hours a day, never testified.
He looked like somebody's grandfather, anybody's grandfather. He looked very, very harmless, and he certainly didn't look like an organized crime character.
Are you pleased with the way your attorneys handled your defense?
I'm sorry, but no comment.
Well, you can't blame me for asking, can you?
No, I don't blame you at all. I'm with you.
The jury was with Lansky. They acquitted him of taking money from Vinny Teresa. A third indictment for skimming in Las Vegas was withdrawn. Lansky was too old and sick to stand trial. And in 1974, his conviction for contempt of court was overturned. Meyer Lansky had beaten the law. On the streets of heavily Jewish Miami Beach, Lansky became an elder statesman, a living legend.
The most pious Jews in the world in Miami Beach, who are the holiest people to whom God is everything, Even God wasn't close to Meyer Lansky. As soon as they saw Meyer Lansky, forget about God. This was God. They used to worship him, follow him, look at him. If he walked down the street, they would talk about how slow he walked, how fast. Did he have a dog, a cow, a horse? Did he sit down, get up, what time?
One time we're in this little deli down in Miami Beach, and these two young boys came up with yarmulkes on, and they were kind of looking at my grandpa, and I was kind of standing in the background. And they came up and said, "Mr. Lansky, we'd like to get your autograph." And he kind of looks at him seriously. No, my grandpa. He goes, "What did I do? An Academy Award?" And I said, "Well, we figured it'd be worth some money someday, Mr. Lansky." And he said, "No, son, I don't sign autographs."
Since the 1960s, Lansky had claimed to be retired. Now, as far as the FBI could tell, he really was.
With all the surveillance that he had on him, he didn't have even the facility to get involved anymore in skimming or any of the other sources of income that he had. And that was, I suppose, the ultimate curse of him living so long, that he outlived his money and had no further way of earning any more.
In 1982, Lansky turned 80. He had developed lung cancer. Joe Varon, his attorney and lifelong friend, pulled a few strings and arranged to restore Lansky's voting rights, lost since his felony conviction in 1950.
And I gave it to him for a birthday present. He said, "Joe, that's the best birthday present I ever got in my life."
Meyer Lansky died on November 15th, 1982. There were almost as many reporters at his funeral as there were mourners.
When Lansky died, I don't think he had $300,000 to his name. And that sounds like a lot of money, but it was a mere pittance to a man that made millions.
It was still widely believed that Lansky had millions tucked away somewhere, a Swiss bank account perhaps, but the money never turned up. Meyer Lansky outlived just about every one of his cronies from the heyday of the New York mob, and he did it the old-fashioned way. He kept his mouth shut. Even when he talked, Lansky never gave himself away or gave away any of his partners.
Very, very careful, very and very smart. Throughout Lansky's career, if you take him way back from the beginning, he was always 2-3 steps ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, he liked having an edge, and I think he liked having an edge, especially on people that were legitimate that he was trying to get over on. So, you know, gave him pleasure.
He was a very civilized and a very businesslike individual. It might sound like heresy, but you could like Meyer Lansky.
Although he always said